series. In this tutorial we'll be going over object-oriented programming. OOPS. So OOPS stands for object-oriented programming. So object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm in which programmers will represent a real-world object using code. So let's get started. So this is a more advanced topic. It is more complicated than the previous tutorial that you have been dealing with, but if you have understood the previous tutorial, this shouldn't be that difficult for you. It's quite easy. It may not click with you the first time, but just be persistent. It will come slowly. So let's get started. So the first thing that we'll be discussing when it comes to object-oriented programming is the classes. So what is a class? A class is basically a blueprint from which an object can be constructed. So a class has mainly two things inside of a class. A class has attributes or methods. So you can think of a class like blueprints from which you can use to build real-world objects. For example, thinking of an apartment. Apartment has a certain number of rooms, which are the attributes or the properties. The apartment has a certain color, the rent of the apartment, the number of toilets, and so on. While the methods are the things that the class can do. So these are the methods. So let's move on to the terminologies that we need to understand when it comes to working with classes. So an instance is an object that is created from a class. So a class is a blueprint, while an instance is the object that is created from that blueprint. So instantiate is a process whereby we make an object or an instance of a class. A method is a function, just like the normal function that we use, but it exists inside of a class and takes the self argument as the first parameter. So that's what a method is. So a method is basically a function but exists within a class. So it's just a normal function but that exists within a class block. Okay, so a class we have discussed. So an attribute is the properties that a class has. So knowing these basic terminologies, let's get to the code and work with classes. So I'll open up my Visual Studio Code here. So to create a class is very simple. You simply say class, keyword, and then the name of that class, apartment, okay, and then call, and then and then that one. So here, since the class is an empty class, we use the pass. So the pass, I told you that whenever you create an empty block in Python, you put in a pass to avoid an error. So if you run this right now, we don't get an error, but if you remove the pass and you run this, we should get an error. And we did get an error. Okay, that's why we put the pass to tell Python that it should just keep it and not consider it. Okay, so that's how we create a class in Python. Now that we have created a class, this class is basically just an empty class. Let's create an object of this class. So this is okay. Something that I have to tell you is that apartment. Okay, I've made a mistake there. So it's apartment. So, and the naming convention of a class is that you always start with a capital letter. The name of a class must always start with a capital letter. That is the convention in Python. So this convention is known as Pascal's naming convention, whereby the first the first letter of each word is capitalized. So even if I put here apartments and be rent should be capitalized. Okay, so this is known as Pascal naming convention, whereby the first letter of each word is capitalized. So we use the same naming convention when it comes to naming of a class. So now let's create an object of a class. Let's call this apartment_1. So this to create an object of a class, which is known as instantiation. So do this, we just say the identifier and then the name of that class that we want to instantiate. So this is an instance or an object of this class. Okay, so that's how we create a class. That's how we create objects in Python. So let's make two objects. So let's copy and paste this over here and change this to 2. So now we have 2 objects. So I told you earlier in Python, our classes have attributes and methods. So now let's give some attributes to our objects. So these are the objects. To assign attributes, we simply say their name and then I'll give some attributes. So an apartment can have a price. The price, maybe it's being sold, so it has a price. Apartment, it can have a location, maybe say downtown. Apartment can have apartment can also give it another attribute of bedrooms, like the number of bedrooms in that apartment. We can say there's 2 bedrooms. Apartment can also have maybe a seller, the person who's selling that apartment, maybe can be Prince. Okay, so these are the attributes, are the attributes of that object. So let me just copy and paste this twice. So just Ctrl V, and then I'll use this over here, and then I'll use the multi-select. Okay, I made a mistake. This is 1, then this is apartment underscore 1. Okay, so I'll select this and I'll simply change this to 2. So apartment 2. Okay, so we have apartment 1 and an apartment 2. So this should be 1 and underscore this should be 1. So let me save this right now. We didn't get any errors. So we have 2 objects which are of the class apartment. So they have some attributes, which are these attributes are actually known as instance attributes. We'll discuss that later on, but for now you can see it has some attributes, which are the price, the location, the bedrooms, and the seller we're selling that apartment. So let's say this is 3,000. That's 3 apartments, downtown east, and the seller is maybe James. Okay, so now we have these 2 objects which have these properties or attributes, so we can work with them. We can say apartment 1 dot, we can print on the price. So if you run this right now, we should print the price of the apartment 1 on the screen, which is 2,000. So you can just there's another print statement, apartment 2. We can print its location. Okay, so now if you run this code, it should work. We get 2,000 for the first apartment's price, and the downtown east for the second apartment's location. So that's how we can work with objects and add their attributes and give attributes to them. Okay, so now you can see that we have repeated code a lot of time. We just copied the same thing and pasted it with few differences. So every time you're repeating something in programming, there is obviously a better way you can do it. So there's a principle that says the dry principle, which stands for do not repeat yourself. So you can see here we have repeated ourselves so many times. And object-oriented programming, one of the things that it supports, promotes, is do not repeat yourself principle. So we can do this in a better way. Imagine that you wanted to create like 1,000 of these objects. So we should copy this and paste it 1,000 times. That is highly inefficient. So to do this, we use classes. That's where the real power of classes comes in. So this brings us to the end of this part of our object-oriented programming series in Python. In the next video, we're going to go over what are constructors in Python and how constructor can be used to reduce the number of lines of code when making an instance or an object every time. This will help us specify the attributes. We'll also be going in the next video. Also be going over what methods, which are just basically functions within a method. So this will be going over in the next tutorial. Guys, if you find this tutorial helpful, please do not forget to like, to share, and to subscribe to this channel for more content like this. Thanks for watching.